Ryan, this is the problem. All of this is so oblique. All of this is so obscure. The viewing public has no idea what's going on, and this is by design. And we're now in a position where if I say something like, all of the things that we've just discussed in this call lead me to the conclusion that Democrats didn't actually want the good thing to happen. A bunch of blue checks and Tiffany crosses and Soledad O'Brien's come screaming down my throat saying, oh, she's unhinged. She thinks everyone's a bad faith actor. Oh, the name of her podcast is ironic. Blah, 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 blah. Because they don't have a bloody clue as to what's been going on.
The problem is they have perfectly designed the system to make people like you look crazy, because on the specific point, the blue checks are correct, because these structures in place make it so they couldn't do anything at that precise moment. But you, on a deeper level, are correct, because they are the ones that happily built those structures and constructed them, built the walls around themselves so that they never have to do the things that they don't want to do, that they want to say they want to do, but they don't want to do. So you are right. But because they've built the walls, she's also right, because those walls are now there because they built the walls. They have to knock those walls down. Ari says he thinks that you could just hire and fire, and that it was just politics. That Pat Leahy would say,
that was my understanding.
I'm going to lose my mind if you do this. Where so Schumer could have maybe
Pat
been
Leahy can lose his
Schumer
mind.
could have challenged it and been like, you know what? Look, I'm a leader. Let me lead, and I need my own parliamentarian. Like.
So then what happens? Pat Leahy, boo effing who? Pat Leahy's upset. Now what's he going to do? Is he going to vote against the American Rescue Plan? Is he going to vote against Build Back Better?
Right. Hey, put it in front of him. Yeah. I mean, there's like 15 of them, but put it in front of all of them. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Put it in front of them. So here, and then at very least, maybe they'll vote it down. But I personally would rather live in a world where I'm not the one that looks crazy. Patrick Leahy is the one that looks crazy. And the American people have an opportunity to vote his ass out of office and vote all of these people out of office because they're finally exposed for what they really are. And this has been the project of the fraud squad, whatever you want to call it, is to expose the extent to which there are these structures in place and that people are playing along, because at a certain point you also have to hold the Pramila Jayapals and even, I'm sorry, the AOCs and stuff accountable, because at the end of the day, we see what's going on. She's the one that's standing there in tears on the House floor because it's something that Nancy Pelosi said to her over the Iron Dome vote. And our instinct is to actually side with AOC and be mad at Nancy Pelosi. But if AOC and the squad members don't come to us and explain what's going on and create the environment that you described, enabled us to get the extended unemployment benefits and get the public mad, inform the public, and threaten to withhold their votes. At the end of the day, they're complicit. And so now we're in the situation. I want to bring this back before we wrap to the issue at hand, which is this fight for the leadership, which apparently is no fight at all. Because while Pramila Jayapal has been sort of positioning herself to be like Two-Face in all of this, where are the more genuine, I would argue, progressives who at times have put themselves in the line, who did try to hold the line over the bifurcation as AOC did? Where are they? Is there just no contemplation of, if not fighting for leadership, then to actually start voting as a block in the way that Republicans immediately realize they're able to do?
Oh, and before we leave that thing, one point, it also shows the way in which, and I would put myself first in line in this, like we got to hit stuff like the parliamentarian before it becomes an issue. Like January 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 6th, it becomes a mess, and that throws everything off.
Screw January 6th. At no point, I'm sorry, Ryan. It was toxic to say this back then, like it was politically toxic to say this back then, but nobody ever, like, all due respect, nobody thought this was crack number 2 at impeachment. Nobody cared.
Right. It's like
Biden had won.
So, and I think now there should be a call: fire the parliamentarian. Do it. Fire the parliamentarian to prepare for 2 years from now. If they win re-election and want to do a big agenda, then you're going to complain again. Oh, it's a real shame we have Elizabeth McDonough. Like,
well, yeah, but Ryan, I don't want to memory hole the fact that people in February were talking about fire the parliamentarian. I remember giving an interview, I think for like The Atlantic in February, about how all of this was about to play out.
No, absolutely. But February, it's like she's already making rulings, and it's like, yeah, I mean, I was calling for it too, but I think a more like she still needs to be fired, like today. Like Schumer runs the Senate now. Like get rid of her. But yeah, the only one I can think of would be like an Ayanna Pressley. But I think she wants to be senator when Elizabeth or Markey, either one. Like they're both old. So I think she has her eye on winning that seat. So you often have a lot of progressives who like have statewide ambitions to move over to the Senate, and so they don't bother.
What about Katie Porter?
Katie Porter has some interpersonal issues with like a lot of House members, and that's
because she's good at her job.
I think that's not a trivial part of it. Yeah.
You were making this point in an earlier episode, I think, that was it Maxine Waters was frustrated with her getting so much media attention for her whiteboard displays.
Right. So like you can't win for losing. Right. So that's why most people watching this show have not heard of the people who are rising up into Democratic leadership, because if you've heard of them, then they've made enemies.
So should the enemy be Maxine Waters? Are the enemies? What about people like Ro Khanna? He seems to have been making some moves.
I mean, he pisses a lot of people off too, but
for what reason?
Well, he puts them in an uncomfortable position by taking the position they should be taking, and when he takes it, I don't know. Then it makes it harder for them to be like, this is an impossible position to take. Like.
My perspective is that Rose seems to be doing a very good job, actually, of threading the needle of endearing himself to progressives who are very mad about a lot of things that come out of his mouth, but appreciate that he's like basically the only progressive who's willing to speak to the left media.
Yeah.
At the same time that he does bend the knee on any number of issues, whether it's Ukraine, et cetera. And then occasionally he'll take a real stand over like this DPC letter, which is confusing, but it's refreshing to hear him not throw staffers under the bus.
Yeah, I'm sure. I haven't talked to Jayapal about that, but I suspect when she saw that, she's like, Jesus, like throwing me under the bus. Like that, you're like, there's supposed to be a camaraderie among members, and he's standing with the staff. It's like, whoa, this is pissing people off.
So the elephant in the room that we haven't talked about yet is who the presumptive new leadership is. Everyone's talking about Hakeem Jefferies. Let's play a brief clip setting up who he is for those who might not know him and who might be inclined to take MSNBC pundits for granted when he's described as a progressive.
Someone said to me, they said, Hakeem, you're going to Israel a fifth time? I said, listen, I'm from New York City. And back home in New York City, we consider Jerusalem to be the sixth borough. As long as I have the opportunity to serve in Congress, I'm going to make sure that aid continues in a strongly robust fashion, no conditions.
Jefferies has gone on to support legislation that would punish companies for endorsing the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel. And it's clear that under his leadership, the Democratic Party will be just as adversarial to leftists hoping to win primary elections. The American Prospect reported on his prior activities crushing the left. He started the Team Blue PAC last year to help fund the campaigns of incumbent centrist Democrats against left-wing challengers. And his main ally on that project is Rep. Josh Gottheimer, the corporate Democrat who was instrumental in sinking the social welfare programs in the Build Back Better legislation. Prospect noted that the formation of Team Blue was likely about, quote, settling scores with young squad-adjacent progressives. As they say, meet the new boss. Same as the old boss.
That was from the good folks over at Means TV, who I know The Intercept reported on when they did the first ad for AOC that got her so much notoriety. So shout out to Means TV for that little bit of coverage. Ryan, what should we know about the man?
Yeah. People who kind of look at the world in a black and white way have a hard time knowing when things are going to get worse. But like for the left, when it comes to the leadership of the Democratic Party, things just got worse. Like believe it or not, like there is a more hostile, leadership than there was under Pelosi, and Pelosi was out in public making fun of the squad. You know, remember in a New York Times interview, and like basically any other chance she got, the Green Dream, whatever else she could come up with. Hakeem Jefferies out there organizing, raising money funneling it in corporate money into his own PAC, coordinating with AIPAC and DMFI to run outside spending operations against progressives in primaries. Like, that's who is becoming the leader of the party, without a challenge from the left. Jeffries, and what's remarkable is that Jeffries is a leader of the New York machine, and New York just cost Democrats the House. Like, this corrupt like machinery.
That's such a good point. That's such a good point. So
you can't fail in this world.
Yeah, so in our last episode, we asked with Zoran Mamdani and Ross Barkan, two experts in the muckety muck of New York, is there going to be any accountability for the people who kind of let this happen on their watch? But for the losses in New York, it's possible that Democrats actually could have held on to the House as well as the Senate. And it seems like the resounding answer here, with Hakeem Jefferies being elevated to the speakership post, is no.
Yeah, and Adriano Espaillat might get the DPCC position in leadership. Yeah, it's wild. Like, you would think that, if you're a top player in the party machinery, whose corruption and incompetence shockingly cost Democrats the House of Representatives, that you would not then be rewarded with the leadership position in the minority. The minority that your incompetence and corruption helped to create.
Exactly. So, I mean, help me understand this. How did Hakeem Jeffries get into a position where he is not only the presumptive heir to Nancy Pelosi's position, but also got so much power? I mean, these things are obviously related. We talk abstractly about this idea of being powerful and maneuvering oneself into that position. But what does that actually look like?
Well, it's AOC's fault for knocking Joe Crowley off. Because Joe Crowley would be in this position.
See, I knew we were going to blame her for something here.
Yeah.
No. But I mean, was Crowley going to be that much better than Hakeem Jeffries?
He was a little less hostile, like personally and like strategically to the left. Mm-hmm. He was just as in bed with the developers and the Wall Street and the corporate New York world, and he was kind of Hakeem Jeffries' mentor. Like, that they were very tight allies in New York, and Crowley, paved the way for him to rise as caucus chair, if you remember, by spreading this lie that Barbara Lee had donated money to AOC's primary campaign against him.
Right, I'd forgotten about that.
And she only lost to Jeffries by like 6 votes or whatever it was. And going in, her vote count said she won it. Like, that's how much these handful of votes in these obscure races matter, because they set people up for these future powerful positions. So structurally, they're basically the same. Hakeem Jeffries just has a little bit more visceral hatred for the left. But
in terms of when we say things like Joe Crowley was the most powerful Democrat in the House, or one of the most powerful Democrats in the House, and we're telling the story of how amazing AOC's 2018 win was in that context, when we're discussing power, do we mean their fundraising ability, their just general likability in the caucus? I mean, can we put a finer point on what it means?
Mostly you mean fundraising ability, like that you've given so many people money.
Well, then why not AOC, who, as I understand it, is one of the top fundraisers in the House as well?
Yes. And if she could start raising, and if the squad, they set up that victory fund. I actually looked it up the other day. Remember the squad victory fund? It raised.
I don't remember that.
They set up, all 4 of them together, set up a PAC called the Squad Victory Fund. They were going to raise money and then, build power with it. Each of the last 2 cycles, it raised just like $1.8 million or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I looked, a lot of it was distributed back to the squad members themselves. Mm-hmm. So that's not building power. That's
so, and also, I mean, there was the story from, I don't know, a few months ago where the left was very upset about the fact that maybe it was this PAC, I'm not sure if it was this or another, but money that AOC had raised went back to some of these blue dog candidates that have devoted their lives to ousting progressives, and progressives felt very hoodwinked by that reporting. So it seems like a lose-lose situation.
I think she gave money directly to a handful of like progressive leaning frontline Democrats who had not been on on board for the whole agenda. And they're like, so what are you doing? So that's a can't win for losing, I think. So you're like, well, am I going to build power with these people, or am I not going to build power? But she'd have to raise tens of millions, though, to compete with what Hakeem and Crowley and Pelosi are capable of doing.
So just to stay with that for a second, there's a world where, let's say hypothetically, there's a world where AOC says, I actually do want to gain power and I want to have leadership power in the House. I know that it comes through fundraising donations. And she comes to the public and says, look, I will raise money. You need to help me raise money. They cannot ignore the money. And I'm going to put conditions on this money and actually, yes, give it to people who have not historically been ideologically aligned with me, but on the condition that when it comes time to vote as a bloc, to exert our influence in the way that happened with the extended unemployment benefits, et cetera, they will be with me, or the spigot comes off. I'm really actually trying to be the Nancy Pelosi of the left. Is that just completely implausible?
I don't think so. It would require a lot of money, like 50 million, something like that. But, Bernie raised, 300 million?
Right.
The question is, can you do it in a non-presidential level? And would Bernie get involved? Like, Bernie, if you remember, he wrote an op-ed or maybe gave an interview saying that he was going to go to war with AIPAC because AIPAC was, spending $7 million against Summer Lee, for instance, taking out Donna Edwards, etc. But what does going to war mean for Bernie? It means like basically saying that he's going to go to war and then like endorsing the other side. But he did not go out and try to raise tens of millions of dollars and set up an outside spending operation that's going to then back up people when they get hit. And in fact, it was like more normies. It was like Working Families Party, Indivisible, and also Justice Democrats that spent $1 million or $2 million like defending Summer Lee. Like AIPAC and DMFI came in, she had like a 25-point lead, and in like less than 10 days, that 25-point lead is like gone. But then there's still like 2 weeks to go in the primary, and then like $1 million from like Justice Democrats and WFP comes in, and it plateaus.
Yeah.
And then they're like neck and neck the last 2 weeks. She ended up winning by like 900 votes or something. So if not for that $1 million, she loses.
And then in the general election, it was the first election in which AIPAC decided to then spend for Republicans.
Right. She's not a good enough Democrat, is what their $7 million in ads said. And then they're like, actually, she's so bad of a Democrat, so bad of a not good Democrat that you should vote for the Republican.
Right.
Like,
Okay, so here's the thing. We know that AIPAC is bad. Democrats align with him. Hakeem Jefferies, as we heard in the clip, is like Mr. AIPAC, wants Jerusalem to be the sixth borough of New York. Is he actually worse than Nancy Pelosi?
We'll see, because people change all the time, but he's certainly set up to be worse. Like Nancy Pelosi, although Nancy Pelosi never faced a kind of Justice Democrats, like in 2002, when she rose into leadership, she was like liberal. Like she's like she was like a representative of the liberal wing. There was Bernie Sanders, but Bernie Sanders was not out there endorsing challengers to Democratic incumbents. There was nobody doing that. So to credit her with not going to war with the left requires you to acknowledge that there wasn't actually a left to go to war with. Like so. Right. So maybe if there was. That's why
Shahid Buttar, who feels as though he got railroaded and kind of abandoned by the left with this Me Too charge that wasn't even. It was like more of a workplace.
He's a jerk. Yeah, he's a mean boss.
It was I'm sorry. What's the guy in Massachusetts whose name is flying out of my head?
Morse.
Alex Morse kind of a situation where the left like readily abandoned him. Same with Scott Stringer. The kind of like impulsively, we're the good guys, we can't stand behind this, just completely threw his campaign under the bus. And in retrospect, it seems like people like Nancy Pelosi, the establishment, has no qualms about weaponizing just the air of a Me Too allegation to derail progressive candidates. So even that attempt didn't get the same backing from even the left as it might otherwise have gotten.
Yeah, and also a lot of you've seen a lot of progressives say that the Murdoch, New York Post, Fox News kind of celebration of violence in New York City, which hurt Democrats in Long Island and outside of the city, was really boosted by Eric Adams,
Mm-hmm.
feeding into it the other time.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, guys, y'all got Eric Adams elected.
Mm-hmm.
That's your city.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so it came back to bite you.
I mean, speaking of Eric Adams, it does seem to me that one area in which Hakeem Jefferies is going to be tough to go up against is because we've also seen the way that identity has been weaponized to defend candidates who are not white men. And so there was a yes queen aspect of Nancy Pelosi's appeal to the general public, ripping up the paper, the petty clap behind Trump and all of that sort of thing. And here comes Hakeem Jefferies. And we've already seen hints that we're going to get the kind of defense that says, how dare you try to attack a black man, et cetera, et cetera. I am not looking forward to that. I'm like preemptively teeth on edge about having to be, whether those kind of accusations are pointing out the obvious ways in which he is a corporate dem.
Yeah, and he's gonna he loves to drop hip hop lines. He loves to like play the kind of. Have you seen some of the clips? They're
No.
He'll like play like a Dre or Snoop song and make up his own lyrics about representing his congressional district. It's like it's something.
He can't be serious.
He quotes like Biggie and Tupac on the floor. Like that's it. That's a move he makes.
You can't use Tupac for evil purposes. That's
Try him.
beyond the pale. All right, I'm gonna have to insert one of those instances in here.
I thank the distinguished gentleman from Maryland for yielding. It was all a dream. I used to read Word Up magazine, Salt and Pepper and Heavy D up in the limousine, hanging pictures on my wall. Every Saturday, Rap Attack, Mr. Magic, Marley Marl. Those were the words of the late, great, notorious B.I.G. Biggie Smalls, Frank White, the king of New York.
All right, so but silver lining, Ryan, is there any chance that because Hakeem Jeffrey might be a little bit less delicate with his touch than Nancy Pelosi in terms of corralling progressives, the kind of open way in which he is courting like AIPAC in that clip, the open way in which he's antagonistic to progressives, is there any chance that might provoke the progressive caucus, the legitimate progressives, I don't want to say the progressive caucus, into taking more of an adversarial stance than they were willing to take with Nancy Pelosi?
He may indeed sharpen the contradictions. Like, yeah, he could call the question.
So you think that he will sharpen the contradictions? You don't have a lot of hope that the squad is going to sharpen the contradictions in response to him.
I think your point is a good one, that Pelosi was good at keeping everybody together, and like fighting a cloud in some ways. Like it was more difficult to grab a hold of something to like really seize onto. I think he probably will give them plenty of things that they could grab onto. They might not even have a choice. Like he's the kind that in the past has just picked fights. It's because I think he feels like he's on the defensive. Like he feels like he's the victim, that these Justice Democrats are trying to like primary the entire Democratic caucus, and he needs to counterattack and fight back. And so, he's going to be jumpy. So I think you're probably right that there will be more chaos, and in chaos there are more opportunities to kind of show where you stand and where the other side stands. There are already people saying to him, like, you got to be a different person now. Like you're not, you can't be this intra-party knife fighter the same way. Like because you're now leader and you want to be speaker. That means you got to be speaker for everybody. We don't know if he's going to take that advice, what that means, if he just tones it down and fights the war through Josh Gottheimer, who was his like ally in setting up this thing. So it's not as if he's going to back off, but he might rhetorically back off. But he might also not be able to help himself because he just really seems to like not like them a lot.
Yeah, temperamentally, it does feel personal when you hear him talking about progressives. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And I wonder, I mean, my last question here is, do we actually think that there is any gains to trade? Will there be any, hopping over the line in Congress in order to get some bipartisan coalitions over some stuff that minorities of both parties have been agitating for? Obviously, Kevin McCarthy has said that he has been critical about the volume of aid to Ukraine. He wants to cut it sharply outright, which is probably a more extreme position than the left critics of the war and the signatories of the CPC letter would take. But do you think there's any possibility that you'll get a coalition of some progressives who are anti-war and some conservatives who have been opposing this Ukraine funding for whatever reason, whether because they're genuinely anti-war or because they're ginning up for a war with China, and actually causing some mayhem?
Did you see that clip of Matt Gaetz saying that what he's going to lay out, that he's going to try to work with Democrats on it?
No.
It's great. You might want to slip it in here too. Yeah. He says ban members of Congress from ever becoming lobbyists ever. 2, ban stock trading. 3, ban lobbyist contributions and corporate PAC contributions. Another one was a thing about you can only have one bill at a time, because he was complaining that there was one bill that had it was the farm bill plus the Yemen war, which that's absurd, but not going to get all worked up about that.
I don't hate that because Republicans
because then let people fight over it, right?
I believe that no member of Congress, by House rule, should be allowed to accept a donation for their campaign from a federal lobbyist or a federal political action committee. That money all has strings attached to it, and anybody who tries to tell you otherwise is lying. And when members take hundreds of thousands of dollars from lobbyists and PACs, they work for them more than they work for their constituents. And guess what? I intend to offer that amendment on the House floor in January, and I already have Democrats ready to vote for it, maybe even all of them. The second thing I would suggest is that if someone is a member of Congress, they should be prohibited from lobbying for life. Why is it so hard to say that you should choose one side or the other to be on? You're either in the law-making game or you're in the influence peddling game. And those who choose to be in the influence peddling game, go ahead, but you should sacrifice that when you get the privilege to represent 750,000 people. I intend to offer that amendment on January 3rd, and I expect that there will be Democrats voting for it. I will also introduce an amendment to have a ban on members of Congress trading individual stocks. How can we say that that is not something that dilutes our trust in markets and in governance when people are essentially able to bet on the outcomes that they have an ability to somewhat control? And I expect Democrats to vote for that. And finally, I would observe something that has really worked well in the state of Florida, a single subject rule. A bill coming to the floor should only deal with one subject. I was incensed as a freshman when I had to vote on the farm bill and whether or not to authorize war in Yemen in the same vote. And we can still have broad bills that relate to insurance or education or appropriations, but the notion that we lash all these things together does not serve our constituents and the American people. And I would expect, if we're in the majority, Democrats will vote for my amendment for a single subject rule.
They always use the excuse of, I'm not voting for this obviously good legislation. I think this happened about some of that 9/11 funding, that the Republicans who voted against it did it on the basis that there was something else in there. Like, I like the idea of stripping away those kind of excuses. Yeah. Okay, Matt Gaetz, he dodged.
But then Democrats have to get over all of their squeamishness of working with an election denier or working with somebody who is under federal investigation or working with somebody.
I thought he beat those. I thought he beat those charges.
He beat it. He beat that. So, right. Will they get over that?
Yeah.
Because if they will, there are people who are going to want to cause problems for Kevin McCarthy, like Matt Gaetz. Mm-hmm. There's others. Thomas Massie would cause problems for them on something. And if you have 214 or 215, you just need 4 or 5 troublemaking Republicans. If it's something that all Democrats say they agree with.
Well, what do all Democrats say they agree with?
Well, they say they agree with a lot more if they don't think it's going to become law.
Right, exactly. Hey, YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.